Do, do. Hi again, everyone. It's Brittany from Untitled Thoughts. Welcome back to my channel. I am super excited for today's tutorial, which is the Amélie Sewalong part 2. In part 1, we managed to sew together our entire Amélie bodice. So in part 2, today, we're going to go ahead and sew together our entire skirt and our placket and all of our buttons and attach the whole thing together. And by the end of this tutorial, you will have your very own Amélie dress. I can't wait to get started, and let's just dive right in. To start, we're going to finish off the edges of our pockets. Then you're going to grab your skirt back piece, lay it out, and we're going to attach the pocket matching up our notches along the side seam of the skirt. I'm going to repeat this process with the rest of my skirt and pocket pieces. Now it's time to sew them together along the straight edge at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you've sewn your pocket pieces to your skirt pieces, you're going to finish the straight edge of your skirt piece. Next, we're going to head over to the ironing board and press our pocket piece and the seam allowance. You're going to want to do this for all of your pocket pieces. Then it's time to understitch our pocket piece, like so. Set your pocket piece and skirt pieces aside for a second and grab your skirt extension pieces. You're going to want to finish the edge of your skirt extension piece, the one that doesn't have any notches on it. See, there are 3 notches here. Now it's time to attach the skirt extension piece to the skirt piece along the straight edge, matching all 3 of those notches, and you're just going to pin along that straight edge. Once we've sewn and finished our seam, it's time to press that seam. So for this back piece, I'm actually pressing the seam towards the center back of the pattern, which hides all of those triangular bits. And then with the center front skirt, I'm actually pressing the seam towards the side seam. This does cause a little bit of excess fabric at the edges, so I'm just going to clip that off. And the reason that I'm doing this is because in the next step, we're going to place our front and back skirts together. So I'm going to lay out my front skirt. Oh, trying to make sure that it actually fits in the frame. It's quite a big skirt. Laying it nice and flat. And then I'm grabbing my back skirt and I'm placing it right on top, matching up all the points. So matching up the point where the skirt extension pieces come together, the pocket. And then I'm going to pin all around the pocket and down the side seam of the skirt. And see right here, we're matching up those 2 pieces, the skirt extension pieces, but because I pressed one seam one way and one the other way, I essentially eliminated a lot of bulk at that point. So it just lies a lot smoother. And then we're going to repeat with the other side of the skirt before taking it over to our sewing machine and sewing these pieces together. As you're sewing, you want to make sure that you're going through the side seam straight down, and then once you get to the pocket, pivoting, going around your pocket, and then pivoting once more and going down the rest of the side seam of the skirt, and just repeating on the other side of your skirt. Now it's time to sew 2 rows of basting stitches using the longest setting on your machine. I like to sew my rows at 1/4 of an inch and 5/8 of an inch. Then it's time to gather. Whenever I'm gathering, I like to pull the 2 bobbin threads because I find that it gathers a lot more easily without breaking the threads. So for this skirt, I'm gathering from one side until I reach the center front, and then I'm going to go over to the other side and do the exact same thing. I'm not worrying too much about how perfect my gathers are right now because we will be able to adjust those in a future step. All right, now it's time to attach our placket. So taking a non-interface placket piece, pin it along the center back of one of your skirt pieces. And we're going to sew all along this edge. Once it's been sewn, we're going to press that seam allowance over towards the center back of the placket. And you're gonna wanna repeat all of these steps with both sides of your skirt back. Now taking one of your interface placket pieces, go ahead and press one long edge of that interface placket piece towards the wrong side by 1/2 inch. And then repeat with your second placket piece. Now it's time to attach your interface placket piece to your non-interface placket piece along the long edge that has not been pressed and the bottom short edge. So before you actually sew the placket pieces together, what I like to do is mark the bottom short edge at 1 inch because this is where we're going to sew, which helps set up our hem later on. So we're going to sew all down this long edge and then through that short edge that you just marked. Again, I really like to reinforce the corners where I know that I'm going to be clipping later on. So I'm just back stitching a few, going forward before pivoting at this short edge. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing where I go forward a few stitches, back stitch, and then finish off the seam. And we're going to repeat this with the other placket piece as well. And now it's time to actually clip those corners. So you're going to clip and then grade your interfaced seam from the placket just to reduce the amount of bulk that is in there and to help set us up for when we go to add our buttons. Once everything's been graded and clipped, go ahead and turn your placket towards the right side. Feel free to use something to poke out that corner just to make it nice and sharp. And then flip it over so that you can see the wrong side of the skirt. And we're going to hide all of our seam allowances inside the actual placket. Once you're done pinning, we're actually going to top stitch the placket into place all along the 2 long edges and the bottom short edge. And we're going to do this from the front side of the garment, just slowly removing the pins as you go. Once all of your placket pieces have been sewn, it's time to put the bodice and the skirt pieces together. Can you see the dress coming together already? I'm so excited. So we're going to attach the skirt to the bottom edge of the waistband piece. So to do this, I just lay out my skirt with the right side facing me, and then I'm going to start pinning the waistband piece that hasn't been pressed. You want to make sure that all of your notches are being matched up, as well as your side seams. As you're pinning, you may find that you need to readjust your gathers as well. Once you've completed pinning, your dress should look a little something like this from the back side. And this from the front side. And we're going to sew these two pieces together. So starting at the center back of your placket, go ahead and sew through the interfaced waistband piece and your skirt piece. While you're sewing, you may find that you need to readjust your gathers or your non-interfaced waistband piece just so they don't get caught while you're going through this process. And this is what it should look like from the front side when you're done. I'm just removing a couple excess threads, and once you flip it over, here's what the skirt attached to the waistband looks like. In the next steps, we're going to grade our seam where we just sewed to reduce the bulk, because this can get quite bulky with all these gathers. So once your piece has been graded, it's time to turn our pressed edge under and then pin it over all of the raw seams from the skirt, thus hiding everything neatly into the waistband seam. So we're just going to do this for the entire waistband, pinning it into place and snipping any extra threads along the way. And there you have it. Now it's time to do a nice little bit of final top stitching along this edge. There you have it, a perfectly top-stitched waistband. Now it's time to work on marking our buttonholes. So in order to mark these buttonholes, you can either use your pattern piece, the pattern piece that comes with the Amélie dress, or you can put your dress on and mark it directly on your body. I'm just going to use the Amélie pattern piece, and I'm just going to fold back the seam allowances along the top as well as one of the longer edges. And then I'm going to mark each of the buttonhole placements with a pin. Your buttonholes can go either horizontally or vertically. For the placket piece, I recommend doing a vertical buttonhole, and then for the buttonhole at the waistband and the open back, I recommend a horizontal buttonhole just because I found that it latches onto the button a little bit better and stays in place. Once all of your buttonholes have been marked, it's time to take this over to the sewing machine and sew our buttonholes. Once you get to your machine, you're going to want to set it up to the buttonhole settings. The first thing to do is to change out your foot, and I have a buttonhole foot, and for me, I'm going to place my button in this little space here. Now I'm using a mix match sort of array of buttons, so I'm just going to pick one of these buttons that is a good median size of all the buttons, and I think this one right here will work best. So I'm just placing my button in this little space and tightening it, and then attaching this new foot to my machine. And then I'm going to finish setting up my machine for the buttonhole stitch of my preference and get to sewing each of my buttonholes. You may notice that I am adjusting my pins as I go, and this is actually because I forgot that my buttonhole process works backwards instead of forwards, so I had to move each of my pins to correspond to that. I have to say that the game-changing part of doing buttonholes was really purchasing a machine that had an automatic buttonhole option, because before I had been doing it manually. So once I finally found a machine that I really liked the buttonhole feature on, it made the creation of buttonholes so much more enjoyable. There are two different ways that we can go about opening up our buttonholes. The first way is with a buttonhole chisel, and the second way is with a seam ripper and a pin. And I'm going to show you both ways. The first way, using a buttonhole chisel, is actually pretty simple. So you're just going to see where your buttonhole is, and you might want to have something absorbent like a self-healing mat underneath this. And you're just going to literally chisel your way through. And you may have to do this more than once depending on the size of your chisel. See, I only made about halfway through my buttonhole, and I have to do the other half right here. With a seam ripper and a pin, what you want to do is stick your pin on one side of your buttonhole. And we do this because when you cut through your buttonhole with your seam ripper, you might accidentally cut all the way through. Ask me how I know. And then you're going to go from one side and slowly seam rip until you hit the pin. And see, the pin has stopped me from ripping open the entire hole. So I prefer this method because I find it to be a little bit quicker, but whatever method you prefer, go ahead and use to open up the rest of your buttonholes. Now it's time to mark the placement for our buttons. And again, you can use the pattern piece that comes with the Amélie pattern, but what I like to do is I like to take the buttonhole side and lay it right over that placket. And then either using like a pin or tailor's chalk, I like to use a pin and I just plop it right on down like so. And then I pull these out, and that is where my buttons will go. And then I do the same thing for all the remaining buttons. Now, when it comes time to sew the buttons, I really like to set a whole mood, you know? I like to grab some tea and go to a really calm, relaxing place in my house and take my time in sewing each button. This is just another part of the process that I find really meditative, especially after having done so much difficult work on this dress. It's really nice to just kind of like take a beat, slow down, and enjoy your time hand stitching each of these buttons. Before we move on to hemming the skirt of our dress, which is the final step, I wanted to talk to you about hanging a skirt. When you hang your dress, the side seams of the skirt will actually drop. So we're just going to let our dresses hang for a couple of days and come back to them. Once you've allowed your skirt to hang for a couple of days, it's time to level the hem. To do this, you're going to want to take a tape measure and, starting from the waistband seam, measure all around your skirt, making sure that it is the same measurement from the waist to the hem. You can mark these measurements by using a pin or tailor's chalk. I personally like to use pins, so that's what I'm going to do. Once you have marked your entire skirt, it's time to trim off any of that excess. Look at all that fabric I've just cut. Continue this process for the entire skirt of your dress. In the end, I took off an average of around 1.5 inches. Now it's time for the final step of this entire project, hemming your skirt. What you'll want to do is press the bottom edge of your hem up by 1/2 inch. I'm using a little felted clover pressing pad, which happens to have measurements on it. I bought this a few years ago and I absolutely love it. Before, I was always eyeballing my hems because I didn't like the whole process of measuring different increments all around the hem and marking it and then pressing. I felt like that was too tedious. But once I got this hot hemmer, I think it's called, it made the process of hemming so much more enjoyable and so much faster. Then finally, roll your hem up another 1/2 inch. Press it. And then pin your hem into place. And if you happen to be working on the T-length skirt like I am, it's a rather large hem, so it might take a minute. And now it's time to sew our hem into place along this upper pressed edge. Yay! You have officially completed your Amélie dress. I hope you've enjoyed this two-part sew-along for my pattern, and I hope to continue bringing more of these types of tutorials to my channel. And if you like this video and you'd like to support my work, go ahead and subscribe. Maybe, if you want. Until next time, thanks so much for sewing with me. Bye! Say bye, everyone!